cost consideration. Although we do have a process in which that parties would be having 4 weeks from the end of the ASB to send to the Secretariat written inputs on the requirements. We thought having you all here as a great opportunity to get an idea and to present our thinking around the international registry and to have some initial exchanges. During the last year's survey, we know that there are a lot of efforts happening in terms of setting up infrastructure, both inside the UNFCCC and outside. But some of you may remember that last year we did conduct a survey based on the request from parties in terms of how many parties are willing or wanting to use the international registry. And there was many countries have expressed interest in terms of using the international registry. Even like some countries which do have their own registry have also expressed interest in terms of having an account in international registry and use of that international registry. And then this international registry is the aim to meet the design of a system that meets different needs of parties. We know that it's quite diverse. And my colleagues out here who are the technically strong people on the registry issues would be going into the specifics. And we hope to hear some reactions from you today. We are very keen as a Secretariat to work with parties collaboratively in order to make sure that we build a system that is robust, that is fit for purpose, the minimize cost, and maximize value for its users and customers. With that, I welcome you to this session, and I will hand over to Sana.
Thank you, Perumal, and colleagues, good morning from me. My name is Sana Lingorsky. I lead the Registries and Information Systems Unit of the Mitigation Division in the Secretariat. My role is to give you a purview of how we think about the International Registry in the Secretariat and why we think the way we think about it. But before that, I just want to invite my colleagues to briefly introduce themselves. Thank you. Thomas?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Thomas Trimborn. I'm from the UNFCCC Secretariat in the IT department. So I have been looking at the CDM registry systems and the international transaction log from a technical perspective. So, yeah. Thanks.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Vartanyan, and I do software that fights climate change. And at the Secretariat, I'm with Sana's team, and I'm helping them with the international registry requirements.
Hello, everyone. My name is Charity Bau, and I'm one of the program officers supporting the work of Article 6.2 under the team of Sana.
Thank you. And maybe I should make the remark now is that as a extension of our presentations time today, we'll also cover in a presentation at the end the functional requirements for the centralized accounting and reporting platform and the Article 6 database. These systems are the reporting tools for Article 6. They are part of the interconnected infrastructure, so we thought that it might be a good opportunity for Xavi to present the work on the CARP and Article 6 database. But starting now with the International Registry, and I will talk about the International Registry from two perspectives. Firstly, from the perspective of what we know about the International Registry and the registries in general, from the guidance that we have received so far from parties, and what we don't know. And how what we don't know is important in order to stick to the implementation timeline of 2 years that parties agreed on in Sharm el-Sheikh. I will also talk about the International Registry from the perspective of the ITMO. And I think in Article 6, a very common metaphor used in different contexts is the one of building a house. So if I can simplify and say that a registry system is the house of an ITMO, understanding the features and the structures of this house may be a good way to explain through looking at its resident. So I'll say a few words about the ITMO. And then I will make a few remarks on the high-level approach for the International Registry, the way we foresee it in the Secretariat at this point in time, before having received further input by parties. If we can go to the next slide, Xavi. what we know and what we don't know. Michael will speak in more detail about what we know about the International Registry and the registries, because this underpins the functional requirements, or this first version of them. What I'll say around this slide is what are the unknowns and how they impact on the implementation timeline. So what's on the work program for the CMA this year, specifically about the International Registry, is the additional functionalities and procedures for the International Registry to provide services for cooperative approaches if these services are voluntarily requested by parties. The second aspect to be elaborated on the International Registry is how parties who use the International Registry will submit information that is necessary in order to either create or issue an ITMO in the International Registry. And this information pertains to the mitigation outcome that has led to the generation of an ITMO. So the issue around how this information procedurally and technically will be submitted to the International Registry is a matter of further deliberation. Finally, parties will also look at the role of the International Registry Administrator, what are the specifics around that, and what accounts the International Registry should have. While the accounts appear to be a more technical aspect, it would be useful to have this guidance at the CMA level, because the accounts or the account structure of the International Registry really drives its model. And I'll come back to this in a moment. What is linked to the implementation of the International Registry is how this registry will connect to other registries. And what parties have already clarified in the text is that the International Registry is connected to the Mechanism Registry. So this is the one connection that we'll examine. And the International Registry may connect to other registries. So all this falls in the scope of interoperability arrangements. This is how the different registry systems communicate to each other in order to exchange information and data on ITMOs. And here the CMA will discuss this matter under two agenda items, under Article 6.4, Rules, Modalities and Procedures for the mechanism, and under Article 6.2. So how exactly the connection will be operationalized. And also under Article 6.4, parties will discuss how the mechanism registry will connect to other registries, and we believe this will have bearing on how the International Registry may connect to other registries. So we will keep this in the scope of our conversation. And finally, because the Article 6 is a holistic system, it will implement not only integrated registries, reporting tools and information systems, but also the full process of the reporting and review is a fully integrated process. Other outcomes on the work program, other outcomes on elements of the work program of the CMA will also feed into the requirements for the International Registry. And chiefly amongst those are the outcome on the authorization process, and I mean the authorization process of ITMOs towards users. So how parties foresee this process will tell us how authorization status will be tracked for ITMOs, and if this authorization status is to change, how we're going to perform that. The next very relevant item is the finalization of the agreed electronic format. This will tell more about how the registries will track the data, will compile the reports, and in what format this data will be tracked. And finally, the accounting rule that will apply on ITMOs which are authorized for dual use, for NDC and for other international mitigation purposes, on first transfer will also inform the business rules of the International Registry. So all these elements are important for us to be able to finalize the requirements for the International Registry by the end of this year, which will allow us to complete the necessary processes for engaging a service provider and then move to the phase of software development. In parallel to the work of the CMA, we're doing our work at the Secretariat. We have received the mandates. We have published now the requirements for the International Registry. The next step is to work on the processes and procedures for the International Registry, its day-to-day operations, how they will be governed. We also have a request to implement an interim solution next year, and finally roll out the system by the end of 2024. We're also undertaking work in relation to interoperability. The Secretariat has been requested to develop standards and recommended practices for electronic recording of ITMO data and communication standards for interoperability. This work will be conducted alongside the body that the Secretariat will convene. This is the Article 6 Registry Administrators Forum. This forum will comprise of technical experts who work around registry issues, and they will share information, exchange best practices, but they will also inform the work of the Secretariat on the standards. So all this is relevant. And finally, the Secretariat will work on the implementation of the mechanism registry, this time under the supervisory body, because the CMA has already issued their guidance on how the mechanism registry will be implemented last year. So this is basically the timeline. Again, hopefully by the end of the year, with the additional guidance that we'll receive from parties, we'll be able to rapidly enter the software implementation phase, working towards a final solution by the end of 2024. Now, a few words about the ITMO and the way the ITMO will be tracked in the international registry. So just to recall what an ITMO is, it's a very central issue for the guidance, and it's for good reason that ITMO is described in the first paragraph of the Article 6.2 guidance. In several sub-paragraphs, we have the elaboration of an ITMO, but we can boil down this to the concept of ITMO being an offset. So the ITMO is an offset which is representing a mitigation outcome which is authorized, and this mitigation outcome can be tracked in CO2 equivalent, in terms of CO2 equivalent, or some other metric which is aligned with the NDCs of the parties which engage in the cooperative approach that generates the ITMO. And this offset, we understand from parties by listening carefully to them over the last 2 years, this ITMO could be tracked in under one of two forms. So the first one is the serialized unit. And serialized units are quite prevalent on the carbon markets. They're well understood. Serialized units can be transferred between accounts, and they are tracked in transactional registries. The second form for tracking ITMO is the so-called serialized amount, where the serialized amount actually is reflective. It's a method to account for a unit. It's reflective of the movements of an underlying unit which represents the mitigation outcome, which is tracked in another registry, to which we refer to as an underlying cooperative approach registry. And in in contrast to a transactional registry, a non-transactional registry which tracks accounting amounts will depend on the information coming from the transactional registry, which actually track the mitigation outcomes as units. So these are the two methods which we understand parties envisage for tracking ITMOs in their two registries, and therefore we're talking about two types of registries: the transactional registries and the non-transactional registries. The notion of a non-transactional registry leads to the notion of layered registry architecture. Okay, so yeah, sincere apologies about that. I don't think we have too many places. Apology for this situation. I believe we are recording this session, so hopefully colleagues will be able to make the time to see the rest of the presentations online. So sincere apologies for this situation. But let's continue. It would be good to open the door at some point. So now talking about the layered registry architecture, which is driven by this notion of having an accounting registry that tracks ITMOs that are reflective of an underlying registry mitigation outcome unit. So how parties will implement their registry system ultimately will depend on the type of cooperation they engage in and what registry design or what tracking arrangement this cooperative approach will envisage. But essentially parties could implement a transactional registry which tracks their ITMOs as units, or it could implement a registry which tracks the movements of mitigation outcomes in underlying cooperative approaches registry. And this could be suitable for a situation where country, for example, engages in multiple cooperative approach arrangements. The question of, this brings us to the question of what form the international registry would take. And the conclusion we have in the Secretariat, and by listening to parties, of course, is that the international registry could be developed to accommodate for both modes of operation, or the two types of registry. So the international registry could be developed to perform in a transaction as a transactional registry, and it could also perform as an accounting registry, which tracks information which is coming from underlying cooperative approach registries. And the mechanics around how this could work will be explained to us by Michael in a moment. But essentially, from the survey last year, from the conversations among parties last year and this year, we have embedded in the first version of the functional requirements for the international registry a mode whereby the international registry will be able to deliver services to countries which would like to have a transactional registry for their cooperative implementation, and countries who would like to use the international registry in an accounting mode. Now, finally, in terms of the actual approach to the implementation of the international registry, I would like to bring now in the picture the mechanism registry, because the two registries are connected, obviously. The international registry is foreseen to be more of a block of apartments with individual flats for the countries which use its services. And the guidance is telling us that each country that utilizes the international registry will have its own party-specific section. Now, by having party-specific sections for each country, countries will have a degree of freedom of how they want to operate their sections, but they will all benefit from sharing the same, basically the same structure. This will ensure that information on ITMOS between the different party sections could be enabled, and that the information will be always tracked consistently, and this is essentially the lowest cost and the most practical approach to implementing the international registry in a way that caters for a number of parties. And this concept could be extended to the mechanism registry, because the mechanism registry is a transactional registry. This we know. It will track the units issued under the mechanism. The mechanism registry, by the virtue of being connected to the international registry, could also be housed on the same infrastructure that implements the international registry. Again, this approach will drive cost and will ensure that the connectivity arrangement between the two registries can be very easily facilitated. It will come down to the types of information to be exchanged between the two registries, be a configurational matter. So what kind of doors between the two registries will be opened, it will depend ultimately on how parties tells us that the information should move. But essentially, housing the two registries together on the same infrastructure, operating them under similar provisions and processes, would ensure that we have a simple and straightforward approach to interconnectivity, no reliance on the interoperability standards, which would be relevant then to the connectivity to other registries, and it will be the lowest cost approach to implementing the registry. So all this is explained in the functional requirements document. And we hope that you will review it to some degree. But I'll stop here and I'll pass on to Michael, who will take us through the International Registry House.
Thank you, Sana. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I recently got myself a new clicker, so I wanted to try it. I will be standing here. Good. So once again, my name is Michael, and I make software that fights climate change, and including actually registries. And at the Secretariat, I help Sana and her team to conceptualize and develop the international registry. And actually, with luck, also mechanism registry could be a part of it, like Sana just said. So this is a longer presentation. I hope you all had your coffee in the morning and you will not fall asleep. But if you eventually fall asleep during this presentation, at the very last slide, there will be a QR code for a document where like all the content of this presentation, and more will be presented. So, good. I also wanted to offer you to stop me and ask questions in the middle, but I guess the rules are strict here, and the questions should come at the end. So with that, let's go. Let's see if it actually works. Good. So I'm not going to repeat what registries are. Sana just presented it. And first off, let me quickly review the CMA mandates that brought us where we are at the moment and told us that we need registries. I actually hate the text-only slides as much as you do, but yeah. I promise you that I only have 3 of such slides in my presentation, so bear with me. It's the first one of the 3. So the first mandate comes from CMA 3, and it comes from freezing and windy Glasgow, and it says that parties should have a registry or an access to a registry. And any party that doesn't have either may get access to the international registry. The international registry shall avail to the party the same functionalities, more or less, as a normal national registry would have. So most of you here know that these functionalities, what these functionalities are. I will not read this list really, as we will look into all of these functionalities in just a moment. The Glasgow Conference also stipulated that the international registry shall be part of the compilation, accounting, and reporting platform. And my colleague Chavi will talk about this in just a moment. No, actually, it will not be in just a moment. It will be for the survivors of my presentations. Some 15 minutes down the road. So, yeah. So this is the second one of my 3 text-only slides, and the pictures are coming. The pictures are coming. So, contrary to the windy and cold Glasgow, in pleasant and sunny Sharm, CMA 4 clarified the mandate for the international registry. Well, here I have no choice but to almost read the slide to you. Please don't fall asleep. And again, the pictures are coming. The international registry is an electronic database. It's kind of obvious, but good to clarify. Like inside this database, there will be party-specific sections that are isolated from each other. At the same time, and this is very important and a little bit kind of technically involved concept to understand, the party-specific sections are separate from each other, but the entire international registry is internally consistent. Yeah, just to bring you an example, party-specific sections will be incapable of, for example, thinking that they hold the same ITMO in 2 different party sections at the same time, like separate national registry might think. So, what else? The Secretariat will administer the international registry. Very nice. The international registry will provide data for the agreed electronic format, as Sana just mentioned to you, and it will report to party section administrators. The international registry will also interoperate, or as the CMA language is to connect, like more technically correct is to say interoperate with party registries, and this is another upcoming topic that we will discuss in a minute. And it will do some other very important but rather boring things that all registries do. Good. I promised you pictures. Here is the first one. So here we see the hierarchy of registry administration, and here is the first time I get to try my pointer. So I cannot speak and point at the same time. Very, very nice. So basically, we have 4 kinds of access to the registry. One is for the system administrator, which doesn't have any business functions except for appointing the business, like registry administrators, and looking after the technical side of things in the registry. And I think that someone like Thomas will fulfill this function once the international registry is in place. Then we have registry administrators. These guys will be taking care of UN-held accounts, like centrally controlled accounts. They will be dealing with the life cycle of the party sections. So basically, if a party requests a section, the registry administrators will create it. Then there will be party section administrators, these ones, and finally, there will be account holders who will have access only to their accounts. This is the last of the 3, like I'm fulfilling my promises, last of the 3 text-only slides. Let's talk for a minute about the basics of ITMO accounting. This is not necessarily just valid for the international registry. Actually, other registries most probably will implement things this same way. But I mean, international registry will implement things this way, and other registries are welcome to follow suit or do things differently. In fact, if you don't need to connect to the international registry, and if you figured out a way to produce AAF, you can do things in whatever way you like. But maybe this is the way that that actually might work. So note that this is also a very technical perspective on how things work, and it may look a little bit edgy for the ones of you who are more on the policy side, but like we technical people need to present things in a way that is kind of technically implementable. Sorry about that. And in order to become an ITMO, so let's look let's look at it. In order to become an ITMO, mitigation outcome needs to be internationally transferable, obviously, and that means that it needs to be authorized and subsequently correspondingly adjusted. An ITMO also belongs to exactly one cooperative approach. The ITMO can be stored in accounts and moved between accounts. Sana gave you a beautiful 3-dimensional picture of how the 2-tier system works with mitigation outcomes moving in the underlying registries and ITMOs residing in the accounting on national registries, which we also call higher tier registry. And these ITMOs track the movements of the underlying mitigation outcomes. It is very important to understand that the international registry can be used in both ways. As Sana also told you, that we have both transactional and higher tier functionality. So in order to understand how to handle a certain ITMO, the registries also work with it's kind of the registries that work with a certain cooperative approach need to have access to and comprehend the authorization that is attached to this ITMO. And in order to have access, authorization records need to be propagated or delivered, if you want, to all the registries that work with a certain cooperative approach. And in order to be comprehended and interpreted, the authorization itself is better be composed of clear and kind of technically implementable instructions, which could be automatically processed by the business rules that are built into the registry. Okay, so business rules are at the heart of the conditional processing of ITMOs in the international registry. Very simple ones, like, I don't know, you cannot transfer something out of a cancellation account, will be in any registry. More complex ones will be specific to specific cooperative approaches, like, for example, you can initiate automatic transfer of levies in case you need to do it on certain transactions. Yeah, wink, wink, 6.4. Let's go further. Good, back to pictures. And there will be no slides without pictures anymore. As we discussed, the international registry is both transactional and accounting, and if you prefer this terminology, both underlying and higher tier. The CMA 3 told us that a party may only have one accounting registry, so a party needs to think if it wants to use the international registry as its accounting registry, and in this case the party would need to actually stick to the use of international registry for all cooperative approaches that it participates in. This is actually cool from the international registry perspective. It pretty much provides like an a la carte service to parties which may use one of the functions of the international registry or both. Okay, so when designing the international registry, we also realized that a record that dedicates a certain operation, such as like the first international transfer or issuance, cancellation, or use, basically all of the things that may be marked as the first transfer from the guidance perspective. These markers also follow very much the life cycle of authorization records. So we kind of grouped them together and called them descriptor records. I think Sana also mentioned that a little bit in her presentation. And these descriptor records describe events in the life cycle of an ITMO. Imagine basically that an ITMO comes to a registry and like participates in the transaction, and the business rules are processing it in a way that the ITMO presents its CV, its entire life story to the business rules, and they decide if this ITMO can participate in the transaction or not, and what needs to happen when this transaction is processed. Need to work on my setup. Good. So look at what we've achieved in this system. Like we have created the mitigation outcome in the registry system. We create an authorization. We create another authorization if we need to change authorization. We create the first transfer. record. So like we create, we never delete or change anything. And this means that all records in our registry are immutable. And immutability is a very important quality of an accounting system, like of a robust accounting system, which is it's very good that we can achieve it in the international registry. Good. So the design of the international registry is an attempt to cover as many possible typical use cases of the parties. You may come up with a very exotic one, but I guess the typical ones will be covered. So keyword for us is flexibility, and the parties will be able to use the international registry kind of exclusively, live in the international registry for all of their needs, and they will also be able to use the international registry in combination with some other registry, either underlying registry or their accounting registry may be external. There are only actually two conditions, one technical and one stemming from the CMA guidance. The technical one is basically to connect something to the international registry, you will need to speak to it using its protocol, its API, if you want. Well, that kind of makes practical sense, because if you have like 200 different systems that want to talk to the international registry, it makes more sense that they implement the one international registry's protocol for communication rather than the international registry needing to implement 200 different ways of talking to different systems. And the one that stems from the CMA guidance, the one reason, the one limitation, if you want, that stems from the CMA guidance is that a party can only have one accounting registry. So once you've decided to be in the international registry for your accounting purposes, you pretty much need to have all accounting needs in the international registry. We are getting close to the end. I am not seeing anyone sleeping in the room, but we are getting close to the end. So here we see the entire landscape of the international registry's interoperability with various systems. And let's start with simple ones. And I want to use my laser pointer. So here we will start with the simple ones, with the UN ERP system that will help us deal with this whole accounts receivable story in case the registry will be charging fees to its users for certain actions. Then we will also connect with the CARP, because we need to provide information for the compilation of the agreed electronic format. Chavi will talk about that in a minute. Now it's really closer to a minute. And it will work with other registries for both descriptor records propagation and transaction processing, if necessary. And that will happen as long as these other registries speak the same protocol as the international registry. And in some cooperative approach, like some cooperative approaches would have their own information systems that will prepare business decisions that need to happen in the registry. So they may want to connect to the international registry for purposes like commanding to issue something or requesting certain information. These systems can connect to the international registry as long as they speak the right protocol and they fulfill the security requirements that will be kind of mandatory for something to connect to the international registry. Ones of you who worked with ITL probably know what kind of registry initiation and the like system initiation protocol looks like. So this is my kind of almost last slide. Yeah, again, no sleepy faces in the audience, and I see a lot of cameras pointing my way. These slides will be available, and this whole presentation is available on YouTube, so you don't need to take a picture of the screen, you will have it. This is my last slide, and finally, we are talking about some cooperative approaches, and let's remember that we have a very important kind of a cooperative approach. Well, it's not a cooperative approach, let's call it this way, which is the Article 6.4 mechanism. Apart from the international registry, we also need to launch the mechanism registry, and members of the Article 6.4 supervisory body in this room will likely confirm that it's better happen sooner rather than later. We know that the international registry and the mechanism registry will need to connect to each other according to the guidance, and the easiest way of going about it is connecting, like co-hosting the international registry and the mechanism registry. And I don't have a nice picture with a house like Sana had, but still the idea is the same, that if the international registry and the mechanism registry are parts of one internally consistent IT system, it will be much easier for us to deal with the connection issues. Then I guess we are also working on the mechanism information system, and like in the previous slide we talked about the information systems of different cooperative approaches and how they might connect to the international registry. Here you can see the simplest way of connecting the mechanism information system to the mechanism registry, which is kind of automatically achieved if international and mechanism registries are co-hosted. This arrow basically. So, and with that I'm actually done. I don't know if that was slightly over 20 minutes as I promised, like last but not least, we have a document. It's about 40 pages long, and it has much more structured way of presenting the same information that I talked about now. And with that, I thank you, and I look forward to your questions during the Q&A session. Chavi.
I will use this microphone, thank you. Let me set up. Okay, thank you, Michael. I already say my name is Xavi Tibau, and I'm one of the program officers supporting the work of Article 6.2. I'm now going to talk about the document that we released, the functional requirements for the Centralized Accounting and Reporting Platform, or CARP, and the Article 6 database. Please note that the document can either be found in the Cooperative Implementation webpage, or you can also find it in the CARP Interim Solution portal. It's actually, I highlight the Article 6 and the CARP, but you have also the document that Michael was presenting to you. I'll start my presentation with some highlights about the requirements described on the document. But before that, I would like to see a little bit of background. So CMA4 elaborated on the key functionalities of the CARP: templates for tables and outlines, a submission portal for participating parties to submit information, workflows for processing submissions, a safe storage to store those submissions. Then we have two big areas: an area for each participating party to support the preparation of its submission and to support the communication with the Secretariat and the Article 6 TER review teams. Then the other area is an area for the Article 6 TER review, actually, and it's meant to access information relevant to reviews assigned to them, and also the counterpart, so communication with the Secretariat and the parties. We finally have the public interface. It's worth to notice here that there is some open issues that might impact on the development of the CARP. The first one is flagging confidential information. So whether the parties will be able to flag confidential information during the preparation of the report, or where they will have to submit two reports, one with confidential information and the other one without. And regarding confidential information, we have limits on confidential information. So whether parties will be limited in any way when flagging that confidential information. Finally, the other open issue is already been mentioned. It's the integration of submission portal. So the Secretariat is requested to explore the opportunities for streamlining the process of making submissions under Article 6 and Article 13 of the Paris Agreement. So now, going to the topic, we can see here a diagram of how the different elements of the CARP are interconnected between them. Let me mention them briefly. We have the International Registry. It has been explained by my colleague, Michael, so I'm going to focus on the remaining components of the CARP. The next one is common nomenclatures, and this is essentially an storage that houses all the standard terminologies needed for registries and for the reporting process. Then we have the submission tools that encompass relevant tools related to the reporting process. It includes the report preparation tool, the submission portal, and the Article 6 TER tool. The first two, I'm going to talk about them in a bit, so I'm going to focus now on the Article 6 TER tool, which is specifically designed to assist Article 6 TER review during the review process. It has several functionalities like workload division among the reviewers, a feature to ask for classification to parties. They can also access relevant material, guides, manuals, and much more, like working, collaborating, in collaboration all together when working on the report, and a lot of features. They are described in the document. It's important to mention that we based on the Article 13 TER review tool that is existing already. So the core functionalities of both are actually the same. Then moving on, it comes template, which stores the agreed templates for the reporting of Article 6.2. Then we have the public interface, which I will detail right now, but it serves to offer a general information about the Article 6.2 and also provides access to non-confidential data. It includes, of course, submitted reports, the outcome of the reviewers, the consistency checks. We'll see that in a bit. And the last one is the Article 6 database, and I have an entire section of this presentation about it, so we'll see it. This is high-level illustrative. This is another view of how we can sort the functions and the tools that are in the CARP. And as I mentioned, I would like to narrow to the first two columns in my presentation at this stage. So the first one is the public interface, and it's a web interface that contains general information about the CARP. Allows open access to non-confidential versions of party reports submitted under Article 6.2, as well as the outputs of the Article 6 TER review process. It also provides access to non-confidential information as required by the Article 6.2 guidance. For example, the output of the consistency checks. And finally, it also provides access to the common nomenclatures. We now focus on submission tools, which is an important part of the CARP. And as said, is a suite of tools for parties to streamline the report preparation and submission and to facilitate the communication during the Article 6 TER review. So here parties can start to prepare a report using a web form. So they can start filling it. This web form is based on the agreed templates, and they can start filling it. They can also pre-populate the quantitative information coming from the mechanism registry and other registries uses to track information, including, of course, the international registry. Quantitative data on these web forms is also subject to validation, which is not these consistency checks. It's just to ensuring that, for example, like to warn a party if it's writing a noun or a name where it's supposed to be a date. So it's just this kind of simple validations to ensure that no mistakes are being done. At any moment during the process of preparation of the report, parties can download the work done in the shape of the template to keep working on their local environments. And then they can go to the submission portal. On the submission portal, they can either submit a report that has been prepared in the preparation tool or a report that they prepared in their local environments. And also there is an option to submit information through a machine-to-machine interface from their own systems. Finally, we have pre-checks that we will see at the end, but you can run pre-checks at any moment during the preparation or also just before submitting the report. Other functions that are included here is the communication channel with the Secretariat and the Article 6 TER review. Then there is a section also for support materials to help in preparing the reports. A progress overview showing information on current and future reports. And finally, it includes alerts and notifications. So to let parties know, for example, if there is any change on a consistency check that might affect the reports. So we are now moving to the Article 6 database. Again, a little bit of background. So CMA4 elaborated on the key functionalities of the Article 6 database. Recording and compiling the information submitted by participating parties, supporting Article 6.2 reviews, recording the unique identifiers for IDMOs, enabling the compilation of annual information, automating the identification of inconsistencies submitted on the submitted information, and then making available to participating parties a pre-submission consistency check. I think it's important to focus on what information is on the Article 6 database, right? These consistency checks and this identification of inconsistencies is done in the base of the information that lands there. So here we can see the paragraph 32 of the annex of the 2 CMA3. And the subparagraph A tells that the Article 6 database shall enable recording and corresponding adjustments as well as emission balance. This information is contained in the annual information of the regular information report. Then we have also that is requested information on IDMOs first transferred, acquired, held, cancelled, or used, identified through unique identifiers. And this information is provided in the agreed electronic format. Maybe we can see that here better. So we have the annual information report that contains quantitative information in the agreed electronic format. That's submitted annually, no later than the 15th of April of the following year. This information needs to be consistent with the information that is submitted in the regular information. It also have quantitative information for the inclusion on the extracted summary. This is submitted as an annex to the BTR of the Article 13. Now I'm going to end my presentation, which talking about the consistency checks, which is an important, an essential part of the Article 6 database. So what it's called pre-checks and consistency checks are designed for the identification of inconsistencies in participating parties' quantitative information. They are actually the same technical checks. The difference is like pre-checks are run on draft data. There is no output stored. It's only for parties to know what will be the output of the official, of the consistency checks that are run when the report has been officially submitted, right? So they are exactly the same. The difference is like consistency checks are done on submitted information, while pre-checks can be run as many times as party wish and only on draft information. So there is a list of possible consistency checks, but that you can check them on the document. But to give you an idea of what they are, we've classified them into types depending on the scope. The first one is IDMO integrity and ensures the consistency of the data associated with a particular IDMO across all the reports where the IDMO appears. Basically means that if one IDMO belongs to one sector, that sector will be present in all the times that IDMO appears, so the sector does not change magically in between reports. Then we have single table consistency that ensures the consistency of information within a single table. So now again, for example, we don't have a duplicated row or things like that in the same table. Then we have intra-submission consistency. In this case, like what we look at all the tables that has been submitted in the same submission. So if the agreed electronic format takes the shape of more than one table, then this consistency will check that all the tables kind of agree between them. We have then inter-report consistency that ensures that the consistency of and coherence of the information across different reports of the same party, and this allowing for tracking and comparison over time. For example, we've said that the information of the quantitative information on the regular information report needs to match with the information that has been submitted in the agreed electronic format. So that could be one of those checks. Then we have inter-party consistency, and we check that the reported information about actions involving multiple parties is consistent across the reports. The typical example here is when someone transfers something, the other one has to acquire exactly the same, right? So that needs to match. Then we have IDMO progression, and this monitors and verifies the life cycle of an IDMO, ensuring that each stage, like authorization, first transfer, user cancellation, is consistently reported and correctly sequencing. This means that that IDMOs are going through steps, right? They are authorized, transfer or not, they are first transfer, they are used or canceled. So this checks that this cycle happens and everything is correctly reported. For example, if an action should constitute a first transfer, right, then this will check that it's actually constituting a first transfer. And finally, we have data reconciliation. This is more like a clearance approach. So what it's done here is like taking all the reports, all the parties, and everything. We just check the quantities and ensure that that they match. For example, we can take for a cooperative approach a metric type of a type of activity type and sector and a metric. So going to the detail, we need to check that some equations hold. For example, like for this specific type, all the IDMOs that has been authorized are equal to those that has been acquired, used, canceled, or held. So basically that no IDMOs disappears or appears in the system. That's basically what this checks. And with this I'm done, and I would like to thank you, all of you, for your time and your attention.
Thank you, Xavi, and thank you, colleagues. It's been a full hour of dry technical presentation, so thanks so much for bearing with us. We tried to do it a bit more interactive. We tried with pictures, with metaphors, with houses. If we were able to convey any meaning to you, maybe you have some questions. We have about 15 minutes now for questions and answers, so please, if you do, raise your hand. If you don't have any question, we still offer you the possibility to send us questions. We have a CARP interim portal. It has an email account, so if you have any specific technical questions, sometimes it's easier to deal with these issues in writing. Don't hesitate to send them to us. It seems that we have a question. Please go.
Asking for
The QR code up, Travi?
Just on the cooperative.
So we have the cooperative implementation website, and there is also an entry, you will see it right away on the landing page, to the CARP interim portal, so it's a fairly quick navigation. Yeah, the microphone's there. Thank you. Charles.
All right. Thank you very much to the Secretariat for this presentation and pulling this all together. More of a comment rather than a question. It's clear from the, from the amount of persons that are in the room and those who couldn't make it into the room that this information is going to need to be shared again. I would recommend, if there's a possibility, to do a interactive virtual component to be able to talk through this, because I'm sure that there are persons who have questions about the infrastructure and the technical details of it, but we just don't have the time going into other negotiations. But this is helpful. Thank you again for the presentation.
Thank you, Charles. And as a reaction to this, we will try to build some of this content into the capacity building activities to roll out in the second half of the year. Lambert and Chris, I think the microphone is.
Yeah, thank you very much for the really informative presentation. I think it was a good event. Thank you for that. One question. I understood that the international registry has these two functions, like a transaction registry and a non-transaction, like a serialized amount registry. So if the international registry is used for the serialized amounts, and then you have an underlying registry, like whatever, the VCS, the gold standard registry, and they should work together. Like, does the international, could you elaborate, are there procedures to link the units, and how would the communication work, right? So that, well, one is not units, one is amounts, and the other is units, but how, will the international registry provide functionalities and exchanges with these underlying registries, like the VCS protocols, to have the data being exchanged to know when a unit was cancelled, for example, for COSIR, that would be kind of reflected in the accounting amounts? Thank you. You could elaborate a little bit on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's take a few more questions because of the interest of time. Chris is next, I think.
Yeah, thank you.
I'll take first.
Thanks, Anna. Thanks for the excellent presentation. So I think this was very helpful. I think my question is sort of related to Lambert's. If you could elaborate on the interoperability protocols and requirements and potential distinctions, if it's a transactional linkage where you're actually moving units or assets from one registry to another versus an accounting approach where you're either viewing or pulling data that's being reported out of a related underlying registry. If you see any differences in terms of necessary security protocols, other types of requirements that would relate to the interoperability depending on the two different approaches. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll take the first question. I'll pass the second question to Michael, while other questions might also come up. You just saw us actually sticking a pointer to a microphone. I promise you it's not how we build information systems. We take a little bit more care. But now on the question of, if we can put Chavi the slide maybe with the two-tier architecture, on the question of how the information from an underlying cooperative approach may pass to an accounting registry that tracks data more. So there are different technical means to achieve that, but there has to be some degree of interoperability, or at least some technical pathway for the information to move sufficiently rapidly from the underlying registry to the accounting registry. And this information to be reconciled so that the two registries that essentially track the same information are in sync. So there are more than one methods to achieve that. I would like here to link probably to the pilot operated by the World Bank in relation to the Climate Action Trust. They are utilizing, to the best of my understanding, some of these methods for passage of information from different registries to a higher accounting layer. So this could be through the utilization of application programming interfaces. There could be other standards and communication protocols utilized for that. But the basic point is that there has to be some technological means that facilitate the exchange of this information. Or the passage of the information from the underlying registry to the upper registry. Now, if you look at some very simplistic arrangements where you have a very low transactional volume that has to be communicated from the upward to the higher level, maybe a simplified means for passage of information can serve the purpose. For example, essentially uploading an Excel or some sort of format with the digital information to the upper registry, and some procedural reconciliation would be probably on the extreme end of simplification. And then having a proper interoperability between the accounting registry and the underlying registries would facilitate a much more rapid and higher transactional volume exchange of data. Michael, over to you if you want to build upon this or if you want to address straight Chris's question. Thanks.
Thank you, Sana, and I think you addressed most of the points that need to be addressed here. I think to Chris's question about the differences in tracking, if you need to track what is happening in another system and you are not basically passing value between the systems, you can have a simple approach like an API basically that is available on the transactional registry side that allows the accounting registry to track what is happening. And you can do it from time to time, or you can trigger it somehow. It's like it's a simple arrangement. If you actually need to pass value, then the question of reconciliation comes up, because you need to establish consistency between multiple systems in the worst case scenario. And we've been looking into like 3 scenarios. One is that all transactional registries are within the international / mechanism registry, which is the simplest scenario, and the business rules will make sure that all transfers are consistent and compliant with all the rules that are applicable. The second scenario is when we have like one external registry where you can make like point-to-point reconciliation between the 2 systems. And the worst case scenario is that if you have like more than one registry that is outside of the international registry. And in this case, there are different ways. Like in Kyoto Protocol, we use the international transaction log for that, which is basically a centralized system that is the ultimate source of truth in like who has what. There are other ways of achieving it nowadays, distributed ledger technologies and whatnot. But this is kind of not looked into in detail at this point. We are creating the international registry, not the entire kind of accounting infrastructure at the moment. I hope I answered that question.
Hi. Yes, hi. Thank you very much for these presentations. They've been really, really useful and interesting, and yeah, to the extent I can comprehend them. I mean, I'm working really hard to do that. And so if my questions seem a little out there, it's just because I'm having my own little, digestive challenges here, but I think this has been really, really helpful. Two kinds of questions. Clearly, there are going to be different views on the suitability of some external programs for sort of incorporation into this process or recognition in this process. And I'm wondering what kind of systems would be in place to ensure that the UNFCCC doesn't look as though it's endorsing a particular external program? I think that's very important for the credibility of the system as a whole. So how would that work? Is there some layer of party responsibility that's very clear? So it's that's sort of the flavor of my question. The second question I have has to do with systems for recognizing SOP and OMG across 6.4 and 6.2, and whether the system that's been conceptualized here is capable of doing that, of tagging different kinds of uses, for example, a cancellation for use for OMGE versus a cancellation that just has to be done to correct, an earlier problem. Is the system, or can it be refined to that degree? So even to the extent, if you had an external system that itself, like an external program, incorporates those elements, is this system capable of recognizing those elements of a program that's reflected in 6.2, or capable of reflecting, for example, a party's cancellations to mirror what's happening in 6.4? Thank you.
Thank you, MJ. We'll take the last two questions, one here and Per, and with this, I'm afraid we'll be finalizing.
Notwithstanding CMA3 decisions to use only one accounting registry, in an event a party decides not to use its own registry or faces a consistent problem, can it switch to the international registry, considering that the interoperability features? And my next question is, what about the role of the emerging technologies like blockchain for development of registries, especially the national registries? These are my two questions. Thank you.
Per? Do you have a? Okay.
Thanks. Well, there's also a cost component to what you're doing, and we're dealing with budget of the whole process in the SBI, and we're also dealing with remaining funds from CDM. So I'm curious on whether this is anticipated in the budget, and whether you need special attention from us to secure the kind of progress that you outlined through next year. And then, following this, I'm very curious when we could see the first issuances, for example, of 6.4 units and the first transfers of either information or units to accounts in the National Registry. You talked about, Michael, interim solutions. So, thanks.
Thank you. I might preoccupy here and try and answer all questions, but my colleagues will supplement. So first the questions from MJ on the dependency on external systems. How the registry would interact with any external systems is subject to negotiation this year, and we'll receive guidance in this respect. So this is paragraph 17G of the cover decision from last year. So parties will elaborate on what is the procedures and what are the criteria that permit a system to communicate with the international registry. So we'll be looking forward to receive guidance on what are these criteria that the systems will meet. And secondly, in all events, we would foresee that any system that would interact with the international registry will receive a vetting from a national authority, from a party, basically. So a party will have to tell the Secretariat that this system is relevant to the tracking arrangements of our cooperative approach, and we would like that this system interoperates with the registry, with the international registry, with the Secretariat systems. And then, in addition to that, there will be some process put in place to establish the rapport between the systems. But again, a system on its own will not be able to communicate to any of the systems of the Secretariat without an explicit confirmation and requests by the parties implementing the relevant cooperative approaches. So I hope, MJ, this goes some way to address your first question. And on the design of the systems vis-a-vis illicit information with respect to share of proceeds and OMG, I think Charlie talked about this with regard to the design of the CARP and the Article 6 database. And also yesterday we discussed a little bit the agreed electronic format, which will capture information in relation to transaction that has to do with share of proceeds and OMG. So the capabilities of the CARP should be such that they would enable to quickly track or easily user-friendly manner, allow the user to extract information that pertains specifically to use of ITMOS for share of proceeds, for OMG, across cooperative approaches and across parties. So through the public portal of the centralized accounting and reporting platform, users, general public, should be able, and we plan to be able to extract this information. On the question of emerging technologies, this is probably needs its own event, so forgive us that we're not going to go into that. Today, we are looking at emerging technologies. We're assessing them all the time. We have a lot of very capable experts in the Secretariat, and we receive input and assessment. But when it comes to the specific design, implementation approaches of next year, we'll be taking the latest input available at this point in time. On a country switching their arrangements between different registry systems, we believe that the future system will accommodate for that. So if a country implements its national registry and at some point decides to move to the international registry because it can benefit from multiple features and functions, there should be a possibility for that, and vice versa. Initially, a country may choose to use the international registry because it's centrally provided, it will have financial support arrangements and all that. And then at a later point of time, when the country has its capacity and is capable to implement its own registry, it should be able to migrate its information from the international registry to its national arrangement. So they are technical means to permit for these shifts between tracking arrangements. But there is, of course, associated complexity with that. On the question, or rather comment pair with cost arrangements, I think the reason we didn't talk much about cost estimates, although this was a request by parties last year, is that we need to first settle these key approaches to implementation before we can go into detailed estimates. But the approach of housing the registries together on a common platform in a shared house is the most cost-effective way to implement the registries. If parties confirm this approach, we will go into more detailed cost estimation, and we will have to essentially have some cost allocation between the 6.4 and the 6.2 operations on the same platform. So with that, we're running out of time.
No, thank you. I think I know that there's a formal session that's going to start, so we'll close here. And I think this has given an opportunity to walk through the various models of the international registry, outlining the functional approach and the challenges. And we, as you know, that like when you even present the outcomes from the negotiations, it's quite dry. And with all these technical specifications, I think the team has made a fantastic effort of keep all of us engaged. Thank you so much, and we would be people following Article 6.4. It's in Chamber Hall now until 1 p.m.